we talked about Genesis, we learned about a few important characters. Let's pop back over there real quick. We have Adam and Eve had Seth. Seth's descendant is Noah. Noah's son is Shem, who is Abram's descendant. Abram's son is Isaac. Isaac's son is Jacob, who was renamed Israel. And Israel, Jacob's 12 sons, his 2 grandsons, which are Joseph's children, make up the 12 tribes of Israel. So the book of Genesis leaves off with Jacob's sons being reconciled with their brother Joseph. We talked about Joseph in the coat of many colors, sold into slavery. But it is years and years later, centuries later, that a new Pharaoh who knows nothing of the wonderful Joseph is put in charge, and he's threatened by the large number of Israelites that are living in Egypt. Now remember, the Israelites are all the descendants of Jacob, who was named Israel. All his descendants are living in Egypt now. And so when Joseph's time was happening, they were not enslaved, but now centuries later, they have become enslaved, and they're in need of a person who can rescue them, a rescuer. So we get to the story of Moses. And right here, we've got Jacob that we just talked about, renamed Israel. He had a son, Levi, who had a son, Kohath, who had a son, Amram, who had a son, Moses. And so here we are on that timeline of how they're related. So the life of Moses. Moses is an Israelite by birth, rescued by an Egyptian princess who raises him as her son. And when he's older, he sees an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite and kills him. He's scared of the Pharaoh, so he flees to the desert where he has an encounter from God to return and deliver the Israelites out of slavery. So if you've heard about the burning bush, Moses goes into the desert after he's murdered an Egyptian who's mistreating Jewish people, and he hears from God, and God tells him to go back to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let the people go. And he does so through these 10 plagues because Pharaoh won't listen. The first plague is the water to blood. Then we have frogs, gnats, flies, diseased livestock, boils on skin, hailstorms, locusts, darkness, and then, of course, the death of the firstborn, which symbolizes, or which they celebrated God's redemption through that death of the firstborn, that God rescued the Israelites' children from this curse, and they celebrate that later all throughout the Bible. Even Jesus celebrates it, is called Passover. Okay, so the slaves have been freed. Pharaoh then changes his mind, and so he races after all of the Israelites because he changes his mind after pretty much every plague. Every couple plagues he says you can go, and then he changes his mind. So Moses parts the Red Sea, and when they get across to the other side, he makes the waves go back down, and then the Egyptian army is destroyed. So that is the story of what happened over in Egypt. Now, they are leaving Egypt over on this map, you can see, and they go to Mount Sinai, which we've got down here. And when they're at Mount Sinai, Moses is given the 10 Commandments from God on the tablets. And the 10 Commandments are their rules for living. And you can find those in the book of Exodus, chapter 20. The 10 Commandments were have no other gods, no idols, don't misuse God's name, honor the Sabbath, honor your parents, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, and don't covet, which means jealousy. Okay, so there's a ton of information in Exodus, but the good thing about Exodus is it's all about Moses. It's about one main character. Exodus tells the story of Moses's birth all the way to them going to wander in the desert. And then we've got the book Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy actually wraps up Moses's life. So before Moses dies, he gives 3 sermons, and you've got these 3 sermons outlined in my Deuteronomy printable, which I'll get to another day. But basically, Exodus all the way through Deuteronomy is Moses's story. The bulk of his story is in Exodus, And then the details are in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is his final sermon to the people before he dies, and then they enter the promised land in the next book of Joshua. So Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy all cover aspects of them wandering. So they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Why did they have to wander for 40 years? God just rescued them. Why did he make them go in circles to get to Canaan, which was the promised land? Well, right after Mount Sinai, God tells them, okay, your promised land is right up ahead. It's Canaan. You're going to have to take it over. There's already people living there. But I will deliver you and you'll win the battle. And so the people decide they're going to send 12 spies to stake it out. So they go send these 12 spies and they go into the promised land. And when they're there, they're so overwhelmed and terrified. They just think, we're not powerful enough to take these people over. They think this is a terrible idea. They're not trusting God. How are we going to do this? And God punishes them by saying, I told you I was going to give this to you, and you didn't trust me, and you're going to wander the desert for 40 years instead of going in right now. So they are basically cursed by God to wander for 40 years so that none of them can actually see the promised land. Only their children will be able to see the promised land. Joshua and Caleb are the only ones that say, we believe God can do this. We believe that we should go to the promised land. So God promises that they will be the only of the spies to see the promised land. Even Moses later will not enter the promised land, but we'll get to that another time because of a sin that he does at a later date. So Exodus is the story of the Israelites being freed from slavery all the way to their wilderness wandering.